So these are our men that we're looking at. Last week, we looked at Theodore Herzl. This week, we're going to be tapping into David Ben-Gurion. And I hope today that you leave with an appreciation for David Ben-Gurion, an appreciation for his intuition, for his smarts, and to hear about his passion. And so that's going to happen today because he was the man that really was spearheading the independence. It finally came to fruition on May 14th, 1948, and Ben-Gurion was the man that led the way. And then after that, we're going to go back in time. It's going back before David Ben-Gurion. We're going to go back to Eliezer Ben Yehuda, who impacted Israel's history as well. But right now, we're going to look at remembering really quick Theodor Herzl, a man that was born in Budapest, Hungary. He was educated in the spirit of the German Jewish Enlightenment. He was a journalist. He had his doctorate in law, and he had a passion for journalism and for writing, but really for community involvement and for Zionism. He really changed his approach over the years of how to understand and to get a better grasp on how do we get rid of anti-Semitism. Well, before he thought we just assimilate. And then over the course of time, because of certain circumstances happening in history, Theodor Herzl changed his approach, and assimilation wasn't the way to go. And he believed he needed to help establish a Jewish state. And so we learned about him last week, and you can go on YouTube and follow up on this class and watch the first week if you missed it with Theodor Herzl. But I want to talk about this man, David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion was born on October 16th, 1886. And this is just as as Theodor Herzl is going to begin moving into the realm of promoting Zionism. So remember, these two men are going to be working not necessarily side by side, but Theodor Herzl isn't just a person in a vacuum. His words and his actions are influencing the world. And the young David Ben-Gurion, his name was actually David Grun, or Green, Green, was born in Plonsk, Poland, and he was educated differently than Theodor Herzl. See, Theodor Herzl was educated by secular parents for the most part, in a secular worldview, even though he grew up right next to the very influential synagogue in Budapest. It would be David Ben-Gurion, or David Grun, who would grow up, and his parents would be teaching him a different way of thinking than Theodor Herzl's parents did. He would be influenced by his parents to be individuals who believed that Jewish people needed a state. They were educated in the spirit of Zionism. And even though David Ben-Gurion would come to Israel and be more of a secular-minded individual, he always had an appreciation for religion. I don't believe he abandoned his Judaism in some way, and I don't believe he abandoned faith. I just don't. He didn't. He's not the kind of guy that you would see go to synagogue services all the time. He didn't abandon these things or look down on them. I think he believed they were very important to establishing a Jewish state, but he didn't necessarily consider himself at all a religious person. David Ben-Gurion had a fantastic saying that he would say, and it was this: we don't just believe in miracles, we depend on miracles when it comes to the founding of the state of Israel. And so he really was educated in the spirit of Zionism. He would go to Hebrew school. He actually wouldn't learn Yiddish. His parents wanted him to learn Hebrew, which is very different from what was going on in Eastern Europe at that time. In Eastern Europe in the late 1800s, you learned Yiddish. You didn't learn Hebrew. You prayed in Hebrew, but you spoke Yiddish. But his parents wanted him to learn Hebrew. David Ben-Gurion would actually immigrate to Palestine on September 7th, 1906. We'll talk about more of that later. He formed what was called the Histadrut, Israel's national trade union. And he was driven by Zionism and politics. These were his passion. And because of that, it would guide him to become, his passion would guide him to become Israel's very first prime minister. But what you're going to see as we go through and we talk a bit about David Ben-Gurion and what was going on around David Ben-Gurion politically is that David Ben-Gurion and the Jewish people that were living in the land prior to Israel's reestablishment and their declaration, I want you to know something. They were developing a government long before Israel became a nation. So that by the time that May 14th comes along, it's not pretty. I'm not saying that what happened on May 14th, 1948 was pretty in any way and, tied with a nice bow. No, there were complications, no doubt. But the thing to understand is in the same way Theodor Herzl was moving this big rock, pushing this big boulder to try to get the world to approve a Jewish state. He wasn't just trying to ramrod this thing to happen. He was really, really trying to get the world to see that the world should approve a Jewish state and to get approval from the world to do this. You'll see that they worked hard to develop systems to make that possible by creating the World Zionist Congress and by developing these movements. And you'll see them in a moment of encouraging Jewish people to immigrate to their ancient homeland, to the Holy Land, to go back to Israel. They were encouraging them to do these things. There were systems set up. The same thing can be said that as Jewish people were coming back in, especially as David Ben-Gurion comes back in 1906, they begin developing government-like systems and putting things in place that would already establish a system of governance so that when the British would finally leave, there was already something ready to go. That's amazing. They were ready for a government to slide right into place. David Ben-Gurion is going to play a major role in helping this happen, especially as I briefly touched on this idea of the Histadrut, Israel's national trade union. Everybody, can I tell you something? Everybody knew David Ben-Gurion. So let's talk a little bit more about him as we move forward. Here's his family in Plansk. David Ben-Gurion, his family. You can see him down there at the very bottom. He's not the little kid. He's kind of a little bit older at this point in his life. And as he gets to become a teenager, around a teenager's age, he begins to appreciate, and his father as well, his father's name was Avigdor, they begin to read Theodor Herzl's book, Der Judenstaat, or the Jewish State, where Theodor Herzl puts forth a proposal for the establishment of a Jewish state. Remember last week, if you were in my class last week, I shared with you how that impacted the Christian William Heckler. Well, remember, that was just the Christian William Heckler who helped Theodor Herzl get an audience with the German Kaiser and get an audience with the Sultan of the Ottoman Sultan. Well, other people were also impacted by Theodor Herzl's writings, and it would be Avigdor, David Ben-Gurion's father, and David Ben-Gurion himself, who would actually co-found a Zionist group in Poland called B'nai Zion, or Children of Zion. And in 1900, think about this, in 1900, it already had a membership of 200 people because of the influence that Theodor Herzl had. So you can see that Theodor Herzl, even in the early 1900s, is built, even though he's going to pass off the scene soon, he is building momentum on a grassroots level to the point where David Ben-Gurion is educating his son and influencing his community around him to join a membership, B'nai Zion, or Children of Zion, and already had 200 members at that time. Very, very interesting to think about. David Ben-Gurion would say this about Theodor Herzl: once only in thousands of years is such an incredible man born. And so you can see that David Ben-Gurion, even in his young age, had great admiration for Theodor Herzl. As he's growing as a teenager, he actually begins this group called the Ezra Group. It's a group that ran Hebrew classes for local youth. And in 1903, they collected funds for a pogrom that took place in Kishinev. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because that plays a major role in Jewish people immigrating to Palestine. One biographer writes that the Ezra Group that David Ben-Gurion and his friends here had an influence on developing in his area had as many as 150 members within a year. And that's a youth-oriented group that would encourage Hebrew classes and also immigration to Palestine at that time. In Plonsk, there he is right there, the young David Ben-Gurion, 17-year-old Zionist. This is interesting because this is when Theodor Herzl passes away. And remember, Theodor Herzl was very young when he died. He was in his early 40s when he passed away. So he dies at a young age. And remember, Theodor Herzl is the one spearheading this movement and casting the vision that people are behind, like David Ben-Gurion and like his father Avigdor. And in Plonsk, Poland, a 17-year-old Zionist felt shattered. He's writing about himself, writing about David Ben-Gurion. Back when he was 10, David Grun, or David Ben-Gurion, had heard that the Messiah had appeared in one of the foreign cities, a wonderful man, taller than others, good looking, his radiant face adorned by a black beard. You know who he's talking about? He's talking about Theodor Herzl. Almost to David Ben-Gurion and a lot of Jewish people, a messianic figure. I don't believe they really thought he was the Messiah, but messianic in the sense of what impact he had on the Jewish community. So much so that when he died, it said this: now this teenage Zionist worried about this great loss to our unfortunate suffering people. There will not arise again in our midst such a wonderful man who combined the bravery of the Maccabees, the purposefulness of David, the strong devotion of Rabbi Akiva, who died while reciting God is one, the Shema, and humbleness of Hillel, the beauty of Rabbi Yehuda Hanisi, and the fiery love of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Can I tell you what's funny? Again, think about this. He's drawing up all of these, not only biblical heroes, but the heroes of Judaism, the rabbinical heroes, and he's attaching them to Theodor Herzl, who's not even a religious individual, which is quite ironic to think about, but connecting him to what he would consider heroes of the Jewish faith after the passing of Theodor Herzl. Honestly, there was loss. And I'm sure this young man, David Ben-Gurion, David Grun, thought, all is lost. I mean, who's going to carry the torch forward? Who's going to make this possible to establish a Jewish state now that Theodor Herzl is gone? But I wrote in my book this one line because it made me think sometimes you don't ever know what God has called for you. You know, whenever you look at the world and you think, well, who can do this? You know, especially if somebody who is a great leader passes off the scene, well, who can carry the baton forward? Here is David Ben-Gurion writing about the loss of his hero. And yet little did that young Zionist know that he would be the one to lead the Israelites across the Jordan River into the promised land. I believe David Ben-Gurion never thought once in his life that after Theodor Herzl died, it would be him that would stand in Tel Aviv and read the Declaration of Independence, which I'm hoping we get a chance to read this evening, a bit of it. He immigrates to Palestine in 1906. He does this by way of the port of Jaffa, and I have a beautiful picture of Jaffa there. And if you've never come to Israel before or been to Israel, I hope that you come with us on the Up to Jerusalem tour. We'll go to Jaffa. You can stand there. But you know what really prompted him to go to Palestine in 1906 was the two things. Number one, it was something he had been taught all along, and he was telling people they should do. But this pogrom that I was telling about that happened in 1903 sparked rampant anti-Semitism throughout Eastern Europe. And he would ultimately immigrate as a part of the second Aliyah, a second immigration of Jewish people that would go back to their ancient homeland. In Palestine, he first worked as a in agriculture, picking oranges in Petah Tikva, which is not far from Tel Aviv at all, as a wine grower in Zikron Yaakov, which is further north on the coast of the Mediterranean, near the coast of the Mediterranean, near the Carmel mountain range. And later he would become a journalist. The Chisinau pogrom, I want to talk about this for a moment because this will impact not only David Ben-Gurion, but a lot of Jewish people, and even impact Theodor Herzl, because the Chisinau pogrom or massacre was an anti-Jewish riot in Moldova, which was Russia at that time. And on April 19th through the 21st in 1903, during the pogrom took place on Easter, where 49 Jewish people were killed, 92 were gravely injured, a number of Jewish women were raped, over 500 were lightly injured, and 1,500 homes were damaged. And I have a picture here of that for you. It was so influential that American Jews actually began in large scale organizing financial help and assisted the immigration. And the incident focused worldwide attention on the persecution of Jews in Russia and led Theodor Herzl at this time in 1903 to propose to the World Zionist Congress a Uganda plan as temporary refuge for the Jews. The Uganda plan is such an interesting plan. You know, they were having a hard time convincing the Ottoman Turks to develop a Jewish homeland in the Ottoman area in Palestine. They were getting neglected here and turned away there and rejected. And so, you know, they started losing hope. And then this pogrom happens. And Theodor Herzl proposes to the World Zionist Congress, hey, what about Uganda? In Africa, the Uganda plan was actually a plan that they put forth in the World Zionist Congress to consider building a Jewish state because of the extreme anti-Semitism that was not only happening in Europe, but also happening in Eastern Europe and as far as Russia, to move maybe a Jewish state or create a Jewish state in Uganda. Well, guess what? That got turned down pretty quick by the Jewish people in the World Zionist Congress, but it was a plan that was put forth as a result of this pogrom. That was the same pogrom that actually convinced David Ben-Gurion to move to Palestine, to immigrate to Palestine. He would actually move to Palestine and he would be one of the founders. See, this is where David Ben-Gurion is so good. He doesn't sit and let grass grow under his feet. He will get active immediately. He will be the one to spearhead many of the programs. He will be the one to community organize. And you know what? People will follow behind him and get behind him. He joins the Labor Zionist Party. See, they're already developing parties, even pre-state. Think about this. Before the state of Israel is even established, they already have political parties in place. So there's already political parties moving to help develop a government, essentially, to have a government that would rule over the Jewish people of Palestine. In 1909, he was a founder of the Hebrew organization HaShomer, which is in Hebrew, the Guard, which would have been like a loosely knit together group of Jewish people that would protect other Jewish people at this time, the HaShomer. In 1910, he was one of the founders and first editors of a newspaper for his party, the Ha'achudot, which in Hebrew means union, and he began to sign. This is interesting. Remember, his name is David Green, and this is when he begins to sign his name, David Ben-Gurion. And he was inspired by one of the leaders, a Jewish leader during the Second Jewish Revolt, Yosef Ben-Gurion, or the First Jewish Revolt, against the Romans. A leader, a Jewish revolt leader named Yosef Ben-Gurion, he would take on the name David Ben-Gurion. And that's where he got that from, as he would sign his names in his editorials that he would write in this newspaper. Now, 1917, remember now, Theodor Herzl is gone, everybody. Theodor Herzl has been off the scene for quite some time now. It's 1917. It's been more than a decade that Theodor Herzl's been gone. Jewish people continue to immigrate over to Palestine. The Ottomans still have control of it prior to World War I. They continue to immigrate over and develop kibbutzes, develop towns, develop farms, agriculture. And so this is, by this point, Tel Aviv is already well established and moving forward. So you have a Jewish city called Tel Aviv on the coast of the Mediterranean. And what happens in 1917 is amazing. I want to read this really quick because this is called the Balfour Declaration, a very important document that Ben-Gurion's going to speak about. And he says this: "Dear Lord Rothschild," this comes, this is the, Balfour Declaration. It says, "I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government," the British government. This is after World War I, by the way. The British win and they take control of Palestine and they make it the British Mandate. On behalf of the Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionists' aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. His Majesty's government, with favor, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done with prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights or political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation." Man, this is it. This is what they were waiting for, everybody. England takes over, the British take over the land that was once controlled by the Ottoman Turks in Palestine. They make it the British Mandate, and the moment they get control of that land, the same year that they defeat the Ottomans in World War I, they say, we're going to help establish a Jewish state. And this is what Ben-Gurion writes in November 1917. "England has not returned the land to us. A land is not acquired without tribulations of work and creativity, without the effort of building and settlement. The Hebrew nation itself must change this right to a living and existing fact." Do you hear what he's saying? It's not enough. It is not enough that the king promises to help and the British government help to establish a Jewish state. Thank goodness they allowed that. But it's up to us now to make it happen, which becomes an effort. It's not just something we can sit there and go, all right, British, build us a state now. No, it will be Ben-Gurion and his team, the other politicians, the other leaders that he has, leaders like Golda Meir, who will come alongside and help establish a Jewish state, to raise funds from other countries, to help establish a military, a defense unit that would develop over time. All of these things that would develop a government that would come into place the moment that a state is possible. And this was written in 1917. Remember, it won't be till 1948 that a country is finally developed. But I want you to see here, a Hebrew nation itself must change this right to living and existing a fact. It's up to us, because it won't be easy. In November 2nd, 1917, with the Balfour Declaration, that's a big moment for them. The British Empire approved it. Then in April of 1920, the San Remo Agreement comes along with multiple nations agreeing in San Remo, Italy. Multiple nations, not just the British Empire now, multiple nations get together, I believe 7 of them, and agree that the Jewish people have a right to exist in Palestine, to develop their own homeland, their own country, their own sovereignty. They sign that into action. And yet there's still going to be, he notices, do you see this? England has not returned the land to us. A land is not acquired without tribulations of work and creativity. You know, this is amazing that he sees this coming. You would think it would have been easy for them to develop a state by this point, but between 1917 and 1948, a lot will happen in global politics that will show that Ben-Gurion knew this is not going to be an easy process. In fact, the British will lose sight of the Balfour Declaration. The British will kind of begin to side with the Arab nations and the Arab Muslims that are living in, and Christians that are living in Palestine, in the British Mandate at that time. And so, you know, the Ben-Gurion was right. This isn't an easy task. Do not read this paper and think it's just going to be handed to us. We have to make it happen ourselves. In 1919, Ben-Gurion participated in the founding of the Adut HaAvodah Party and was elected as its leader. He was also the founder of the National Trade Union. Can I tell you something about most Israelis or most Jewish people that were developing a Jewish state between 1917 and 1948? And even before that, as these Eastern European and Russian Jewish people were making aliyah to Palestine, even before World War I, when they came over with David Ben-Gurion. Most of them, you ready? This might shock you. Most of them were socialists. Some of them were communists. That's why the kibbutz system existed in Israel. Have you ever been to Israel and gone on a kibbutz? A kibbutz, they've fizzled. The kibbutz has fizzled over the years because capitalism reigns in Israel now. But for many, many, many years, what helped found the Jewish state was the kibbutzniks, was the kibbutz lifestyle. And a kibbutz is a commune. It's not a big Russian empire type communism and socialism. No, it's small scale, little communities. And we're talking to the point where you'll have a doctor in the kibbutz, you'll have a guy who does the laundry, you'll have a woman who cooks the meals, you'll have a family who watches over the kids, and everybody does their part, and everybody gets paid the same amount, and everybody, no matter what your job is, you all get paid the same. And your kids, even, you have your kids till the age of 2, I believe, and then once they turn 2, they go into their own little house, and they begin to form their own commune. Of course, they're supervised, but it's communism on a small scale. That's because they're taking everything they knew from Russia and importing it into Israel. And can I tell you something? David Ben-Gurion was as socialist as they get. He was the founder of the National Trade Union. Everybody knew David Ben-Gurion because remember, it's a socialist country at this point, lots of socialist underpinnings. Everybody knew David Ben-Gurion because everybody was a part of the National Trade Union. The Histadrut, as it was called, and he led it. They knew him. He had cachet. He had name recognition. He was the Secretary General from 1921 until 1935 for the Histadrut. He also served as the Histadrut's representative in the World Zionist Organization, and very important, everybody, the Jewish Agency, which would play a major role in the establishment of the Jewish state. It's the proto-government. It's the government before the government of 1948, the first Israeli government. The Jewish Agency would function as the government of the Jewish people in Palestine of the British Mandate. And he was elected the chairman of both organizations. Think about that. In 1935, he's running the Jewish Agency and he's also running the trade union. Everybody knows David Ben-Gurion. His name was everywhere. And I'm sure some people loved him and some people didn't. Why? Because that's politics, okay? In 1947, something amazing happens. The world agrees that the Jewish people need their own homeland, especially after the atrocities of the Holocaust. We've already got, like I said, we've got the Balfour Declaration. That one's in the books. We've got the San Remo agreements. That one's in the books. The problem is, if you notice, the world approves a Jewish state, but notice what they get. They get the little white slivers. You see the white slivers in the map? That's what they were promised them. What did they originally promise them in the San Remo agreement? The whole thing. The San Remo agreement promised all of it, even as much, I believe, as the Transjordan that you see over there, east of the Jordan River. Well, look what happens after they slice and dice everything up in 1947. They agree to a Jewish state. The world does. The British are hands off at this point. They will actually object. They will remove themselves from voting in the UN. But enough nations will approve it. And look at the little slivers of land that they get. The majority of it is desert that you can see down there in the Jordan Valley, I mean, in the Negev. They don't get any of the Jordan Valley, and they're stuck really close up against their enemies in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. But still, you know what's amazing is that David Ben-Gurion was very disappointed as the leader of the Jewish people. He was very disappointed to see this map. He was disappointed. This is the original two-state solution, everybody. Here it is right here in 1947. The world said, we'll give you a Jewish state, but here it is, little sliver here, a couple miles between the Mediterranean Sea and what would the Jordan Valley there, where the border would be. All this desert land, we'll give you tiny little bits. And they were very upset. But you know what? David Ben-Gurion, as he said in the very beginning, as a result of the Balfour Declaration, this will come with trials and tribulations, but we have to make it happen. And you know what? He led the people, and they agreed, yes, we will take this as a country. You know what the Arab nation said, and the Arabs living in the British Mandate said, no, thank you. We don't want this deal at all. So the Jewish people said yes. The Arabs said no. The Muslims said no. They wanted nothing to do with it. And so they were actually more willing and desirable to push the Jewish people into the sea. We'll take care of them in battle. So they say no thank you to UN Resolution 181, this map here. The Jewish people say, yes, we'll take it. Now, this will become very important, everybody, because by this point, David Ben-Gurion, the Jewish people, and the United States and the world know that if Israel declares itself independent, you know what will happen? They will be run into the sea. They know it. They know they're going to war immediately. And so the British say, we're leaving. We're going to get out on May 15th, I believe, around that time. And so it will be May 14th that Israel needs to declare its independence, because that's a Saturday, May 15th. May 14th is a Friday, and they're running up against Shabbat. So there's going to be lots of fun pressure for them. Again, remember I said not everything works as cleanly as they thought it would. Here they are developing an opportunity to build a state, a government, thinking they would get more land. And I'm going to tell you what was on David Ben-Gurion's heart. Can I tell you? This is actually something historians write about a lot when it comes to David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion wanted Jerusalem. That will come up over and over and over and over again in the Independence War that happens between 1948 and 1949, when they're fighting for their independence. David Ben-Gurion wants Jerusalem, and his advisors are saying, I wouldn't put all your energy up there. We need the Negev. We need these other areas. We need areas in the north. But David Ben-Gurion's heart was set on Jerusalem, because as a leader, he knew Jerusalem is what would unite the people. And his advisors were saying, I think that's a tall order, given the resources that we have, given what it takes to get to Jerusalem, taking the fights that would take place up there. We should invest our energies elsewhere. And he will end up listening. They will have a fights over Jerusalem. Originally, if I could just say this, originally the UN, if you notice that map there, Jerusalem is kind of gray. I don't know if I could. Oh, yeah, there we go. It's kind of blurry. But if you notice, it's gray around Jerusalem. That's because the UN understood the sensitivity of Jerusalem to Jews and Muslims and Christians, and wanted to make it an international city under the auspices of the United Nations. And so originally, Jerusalem was going to be a UN controlled, but as a result of the fact that the Arab nations came in to fight Israel after their independence, that whole thing just goes up in flames. And so Jerusalem ends up getting divided in half, East Jerusalem to Jordan, and then West Jerusalem to Israel. So the original plan was to make it an international city. Well, that didn't work out at all. So what happens on May 14th, 1948, there's our guy again. Remember I showed this last week, Theodor Herzl, one of my heroes, my beard hero, okay? There he is up there looking down on all of these leaders, the Jewish agency. Let me tell you where they are. I love this story, actually. This is so Israeli, okay? It's just Israeli. I love Israeli people. David Ben-Gurion knows that war is coming. If he announces independence, war is imminent. It will happen immediately. So the building they're in is actually in an art museum, and the art museum sits, 2/3 of the art museum sits below ground. So technically, it's almost like a basement where they're located. The windows are up high. And David Ben-Gurion chose the art museum on purpose, because if war does break out, he can continue and still safely do it because he's partially underground. So that's important to see. The other is, this is actually Mayor Dizengoff, the very first mayor of Tel Aviv. It's his home. And after Mayor Dizengoff passed away, he gave his home in Tel Aviv, one of the first homes in Tel Aviv, to the Jewish state and to the Jewish people. And they turned it into an art museum. And so technically it's two functions. It's Mayor Dizengoff's first house. It's his house. And it also served as Israel's art museum. So you can see some of the art in the background there on the right-hand side. So he chooses this place for safety, knowing that the Egyptians could come in and bomb Tel Aviv. And so he sends out, and this is my favorite part of the story, he sends out invitations to select people, okay? Select. It's not a big building, people. This is not, Steve and I were just on Capitol Hill. We're not talking about the Capitol building here. It's a tiny art gallery, okay? And so they're sitting in there, and he invites a few hundred people to it. Please, it says in the invitation, please be quiet. Don't talk about this. We don't want to raise concerns. We don't want to become a target in case something happens. So just, don't say anything. Come Friday at this time, blah, 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 okay? Well, guess what? Try keeping a secret in Israel. Impossible. Impossible. Thousands of people are outside. I don't know who leaked this thing. They probably all leaked it, okay? It's the first leak of the state of Israel, okay? And so there they are. They're outside. They're chanting. Everybody's excited. If David Ben-Gurion was trying not to get any attention, well, guess what? That he totally failed there. Okay, so now he's got a huge crowd outside. People are crammed in, and he begins to read the Declaration of Independence. And I want to see if I can bring it up here really quick on my phone. Israel's Declaration of Independence. And let me see if I can bring it up here so that I can read it to you, because I think it's important for you to hear it, how it sounds, and how what he does to connect everything from the Bible all the way to the modern state of Israel. So listen to this. This is David Ben-Gurion. He's standing there. He says this, the land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained to statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. After forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. Impelled by this historic and traditional attachment, Jews strove in every successive generation to reestablish themselves in their ancient homeland. In recent decades, they returned in their masses, pioneers, immigrants coming to Eretz Israel in defiance of restrictive legislation, and defenders. They made deserts bloom, revived the Hebrew language, built villages and towns, created a thriving community, controlling its own economy and culture, loving peace, but knowing how to defend itself, bringing the blessings of progress to all countries' inhabitants, and aspiring toward an independent nationhood. Do you hear that? He's saying, we have been working through trials and tribulations to establish ourselves in this land. We've been doing it, and we are ready. That's what he's saying. In the year 5657, which is 1897, now listen to what he does here. He says, at the summons of the spiritual father of the Jewish state. Well, who's the spiritual father of the Jewish state? Listen, you ready? Theodor Herzl. That's why he's behind him. The first Zionist Congress convened and proclaimed the right of the Jewish people to national rebirth in its own country. This right was recognized in the Balfour Declaration. Now he's pulling all the pieces together, of the 2nd November 1917, and reaffirmed in the mandate of the League of Nations, which in particular gave international sanction to the historic connection between the Jewish people and Eretz Israel, and to the right of the Jewish people to rebuild its national home. The catastrophe which recently befell the Jewish people, the massacre of millions of Jews in Europe, was another clear demonstration of the urgency of solving this problem of its homelessness by reestablishing in Eretz Israel the Jewish state, which would open the gates of homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of fully privileged member of the Committee of Nations. Survivors of Nazi Holocaust in Europe, as well as Jews from other parts of the world, continued to migrate to Eretz Israel, undaunted by difficulties and restrictions and dangers. And he goes on talking about World War II, and he goes on talking about the United Nations General Assembly. And that's when he says, we declare with effect from the moment of the termination of the mandate being tonight, the eve of Sabbath, the 15th May of 1948, until the establishment of the elected regular authorities of the state in accordance with the Constitution, which never came about, which shall be adopted by the elected constituency assembly by October 1st. That never happened. The Constitution never came, even though it was in the Declaration of Israel. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of its exiles. Think about that. He went through biblical history. He went through history of the Jewish people striving to reestablish themselves for thousands of years, praying for it. He talked about what he called the spiritual father of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl. He talked about the Balfour Declaration. He was pulling all of the pieces together to say, we have permission, not just because the world gives us permission, but because of our heritage here, because of our unique biblical connection here. I think it's God's divine providence that in 1947, just a year prior to the establishment of the state of Israel, 1948, in 1947, a Bedouin boy in the Negev desert stumbled upon the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that if anybody says, what deed do you have to this land, Jewish people, they can go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, scrolls that have existed for more than 2,000 years, to say, we deserve it because it's right here in the Bible. And David Ben-Gurion will highlight that, and he will bring it to life. And he will say, he will ultimately say that this ending in the Declaration of Independence, placing our trust in the Rock of Israel, we affix our signatures to this proclamation at the session of the Provisional Council of State on the soil of the homeland in the city of Tel Aviv. I love that. You hear what it says? Placing our trust in the Rock of Israel. You know, we think we have it hard here in America with politics. That phrase, Rock of Israel, almost canceled the Declaration of Independence. Now, see, as Christians, when we hear Rock of Israel, we all go, amen, brother, amen. God is the one behind this. David Ben-Gurion, my kind of guy. Well, guess what? There were religious people that were saying, I want Torah passages in that declaration. The religious politicians, the Orthodox, were saying to David Ben-Gurion, when you write that thing, and actually an Orthodox man helped him write it. He said, when you write this, there's got to be Torah law passages in this thing. Then the communist seculars on the other side of the aisle are going, if you put anything about God in there, I'm not showing up. I'm not signing anything. And so this phrase, Rock of Israel, was a compromise. It was a compromise between the religious and the seculars of Israel that would compromise together under the leadership of David Ben-Gurion, because he appreciated both of them. He knew that they needed each other. The religious needed to be there, and the seculars needed to be there, according to David Ben-Gurion. And they settled on this. The Rock of Israel, that could be our very own spirit, the spirit of that drives us, the Jewish spirit within us, or it could be the Rock of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's however you want to interpret it. But either way, and I hope as a Christian, you went right to God, because that's where I go. But for a secular person, it's a compromise that they made it, and almost made it so they couldn't show up and do the Declaration of Independence. And then the seculars said this: if any rabbi prays during this thing, I'm out. I'm out of here. Oh, that made the religious so angry. So they said, okay, fine, we won't do anything. I think they crossed their fingers behind their backs. Because the moment, remember, they're about to enter into Shabbat. The moment that the declaration was over, you know what happened? The rabbi got up and did a prayer in Hebrew. Oh, I'm sure it made everyone furious, but now it's done. It's over. They waited till it was finished, and they still got their prayer in, okay? If you want to know Israeli politics, boom, there it is right there. What you see in 1948, May 14th, between the religious and between the seculars is still the same thing that's happening today when you turn the news on and you see the conversation between the religious and the secular. But do you know what Steve and I heard last night on Capitol Hill? That just goes to show Israel's democracy, they're the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel's democracy is still at work. It was at work the same way it was when he announced the declaration, David Ben-Gurion, and he worked with the people together. And it's the same way today. It's the same way. And so David Ben-Gurion is the one who would bring this into fruition and lead the state of Israel through their independence in the independence war, because it would only be within a few hours that Egypt would come and bomb Tel Aviv and enter into the war. The war would go from May 14th, 1948 into 1949, and eventually end in an armistice agreement. So again, that would become the nature of war. The city of Jerusalem would be split, and they would actually acquire more land than what the UN had promised them. So they acquired a little more land than what the UN was going to give them, but at that point, that they had settled, and that was it. And so the armistice line was signed. Jordan would take this area, Egypt would take this area, and Israel would take areas all around here, and their nation would be established. I want to show one thing here really quick. I think this sums up David Ben-Gurion perfectly. Do you see him there? It's one of my favorite pictures of David Ben-Gurion. Alice Herzig loves this picture too. I know it. There's actually, when you come to Israel with me and we go to the beaches of Tel Aviv, there's actually a statue, a cartoon-like statue of David Ben-Gurion doing this move. He really believed in exercise and keeping yourself healthy and doing certain types of exercises. I forget what they even called this. But he would do this on the beaches of Tel Aviv, and it's kind of become a historical connection to the Israel's founding and the fun that David Ben-Gurion was. David Ben-Gurion was Israel's longest-serving prime minister until a man that you all know, Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu is now Israel's longest-serving prime minister. He is, but David Ben-Gurion held that title for a very, very long time. And eventually, David Ben-Gurion would pass away in the 1970s. But he would be one who would lead his people. He has national identity. He's the first prime minister. He's the George Washington of Israel in many, many ways. He helped establish democracy. He helped grow the Jewish state. And to think he mourned the loss of Theodor Herzl, not knowing who would carry this baton forward. Well, many Jewish men carried the baton forward, but ultimately it would be David Ben-Gurion from Plonsk, Poland, who would immigrate and make himself a national figure by claiming Israel's independence, declaring Israel's independence, and leading them for many, many years. His party, which would become the Labor Party over time, would be the major party of Israel for decades and decades, until the 1990s, actually. David Ben-Gurion's party would become the major party up until the 1990s, when the conservatives finally begin to come in and change things. And that's when you get a figure like Bibi Netanyahu, who begins to implement more of an American way of politics, an American way of economics, changing the way of the past. David Ben-Gurion, very socialist in his approach. And then you have on the flip side a Bibi Netanyahu who was very capitalist and would change the way that Israel interacts with the world economically and various foreign policies as well. So all that to say, a hero, really. And what's interesting is that David Ben-Gurion's wife didn't care much for Israel. She was a communist. She was a communist who didn't believe in statehood. She could care less about politics. But they lived together in Tel Aviv, and he would actually retire down into the desert. It was really his goal to make the deserts bloom. And so that's David Ben-Gurion, the George Washington of Israel. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. It's a great lesson on the history of Israel to recount the now 75 years. But can I also say this? Next week, we're going to look at something that David Ben-Gurion tapped into in the Declaration of Independence. And that was this. Do you remember? Did you hear what he said? How we helped develop, or we developed the Hebrew language. We reestablished the Hebrew language. Well, that wouldn't be possible without a man named Eliezer Ben Yehuda. And oh man, if you want a story, a great history lesson, you got to come back next week for Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. Very, very interesting individual. And he doesn't get his name mentioned in the declaration, but David Ben-Gurion certainly taps into it there when he talks about it as a part of the culture of the Jewish people. Let's see if we have any questions here. Anybody have any questions? You can type it in below. Is the yellow portion, Nancy writes this, Nancy Olson writes, is the yellow portion of the map, let me see if I can go back on this map, the West Bank? Yes, that is what we would call the West Bank. Most Israelis don't call that the West Bank. They call it Judea and Samaria. This is Judea down here, and this is Samaria up here, biblical Judea, Samaria. So when you talk to an Israeli, you'll hear Judea, Samaria. In America and Western countries, they label it the West Bank because it's west of the Jordan River. Here's the east side of the Jordan River. Over here is the west side of the Jordan River, in where the Jerusalem is, in that area there. And so, yes, the yellow portion there is what would be considered the West Bank today. This is essentially, if you think about it, when politicians want the state of Israel to give the West Bank to the Palestinians for a state, that's essentially what they want them, not this area up here per se, but in this area right here, want them to give that as a state to the Palestinians to live. And so you can see it won't give much room for Israelis to protect themselves along the Mediterranean coast there. Let's see. Let's see. While on Capitol Hill, did you meet Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy? His recent trip to Israel, backed by many congressmen, seems to show increased support of Israel. We did not meet Kevin McCarthy, but we met many congressmen who did go with him on that trip, and they highlighted Kevin McCarthy and his support of Israel and the Jewish people. And I can't tell you how important that was, especially with the way that the current administration is treating Israel because of their political choices. Israel elected Netanyahu. Israel elected that government. They might disagree with it. Well, guess what? What happens is you get a guy like President Biden who steps in and says, well, guess what? I don't want Netanyahu to come to the White House because of what he's promoting and his policies. Well, I love that Kevin McCarthy went over there, and he didn't go over there and demand change among the Israeli policy on judicial reform. He didn't go over there and demand that they change their politics. No, he went over there and said, whatever your politics are, that's between you and the Israeli people. They vote. That's why it's a democracy. Kevin McCarthy showed that there's a large portion of Americans that support Israel, no matter what government is in power. We supported Israel at the Friends of Israel. Guess what? When a socialist, David Ben-Gurion, was running it. And you know what? The Friends of Israel supported Israel when the capitalist, Benjamin Netanyahu, supported it. So it's not about, who's in power. It's about the fact that we want to support Israel biblically, not just a political movement, but a biblical movement. What's the significance of the Gaza Strip? The Gaza Strip ultimately is going to end up in the hands of the Egyptians. I don't know why that necessarily was going to become part of the Arab land there. It might be because of its connection to Egypt, because Egypt will take control of the Gaza Strip after 1948, after the Independence War, and will eventually land into the hands of the Israelis after the 1967 Six-Day War. And so interesting. Ricky writes, it seems that God blessed Israel with capitalism. I don't think God would bless godless communism. What do you think? You know what? I have to say something. I don't know, a godless communism, you're right. There are godless components of capitalism as well. And capitalism and communism, they're definitely not the same. And I think capitalism provides more freedom for people to be creative and to create wealth. And it's created wealth for people all around the world. But I don't think that's God's way of doing things, because I don't think God's kingdom is a capitalistic kingdom. But I will say this, is that Israel definitely was able to survive in its early years as a much more socialist country. Oh man, I have to tell you something. Americans, we stress out about what's going on in the southern border. The southern border, we stress out about it, which we should. I'm not saying we shouldn't. But can I tell you something? In Israel's first 3 years, They welcomed so many Jewish people that were kicked out of their land in the Arab countries, almost 1 million, that they practically doubled in size population-wise in 3 years. Could you imagine America going from 350 million to 700 million in 3 years? That happened to Israel. Israel's statesmen would say no modern country could ever do what Israel did in 3 years. Their people would come and they'd put them in tent communities. They would try to give them jobs. This happened to our one of our first representatives in Israel, Zvi Kalisher. He lived in a tent city. And he would try to get arrested, because if you would get arrested in the tent city, and you got arrested, I think 3 or 4 times, you would get put in a home, and everybody wanted to get put in a home so they could go to school and get fed. And so all the parents were encouraging their kids to steal so they could get put in a home and go to school. But these were the kind of they were trying to house people where they didn't have houses. They were living in tent communities, and it was a very socialist country. They had ration laws that they had to live by. It didn't matter if you were wealthy or not. Everybody had ration cards of how much food you could eat for a couple of years. But eventually all of that changed. And now Israel is one of the most powerful economic countries in the world. So Ricky, great comment there. I appreciate it. Why would there be opposition to the phrase Rock of Israel when the rock is in Deuteronomy 32? Lucille, great question. Why? Because if you're secular and you don't believe in God and you're a godless individual, you don't want to make Israel a country that is a theocracy. That's what they were worried about. We don't want this Israel. There were a lot of secular people that were coming from Russia and from Eastern Europe who were secular individuals, and they didn't want Israel becoming a theocracy. David Ben-Gurion didn't want Israel becoming a theocracy. Today, when the Israelis talk to one another about what's going on in the Knesset, they don't want it to become a theocracy. And so when you're right, it's in Deuteronomy 32, praise God, the Rock of Israel, but they wanted it to be interpreted. They want it to be interpreted the way that a person would interpret it the moment they read it, whether they see it that they're the rock or God is the rock. And so that was David Ben-Gurion's genius there in many ways. And can I tell you this too? The name Israel, that was up for grabs prior to the development of the establishment of the state of Israel. They didn't even know it would be called Israel. They had several different names for what would become Israel. And David Ben-Gurion was a part of choosing the name the state of Israel. They were considering calling it, I think, Judah, and calling it other names as well. And they settled on Israel. But that was something they had to decide. And think about it, the Friends of Israel was founded in 1938, 10 years before there was an Israel, and they were still debating whether or not to call it Israel. So very interesting. Giselle writes, is secular the same as atheist? Not in Israel, technically. I should clarify that. Secular in Israel, you can be secular and still believe in a higher being, but you don't believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So secular is a funny word in Israel because you can believe there's a God out there, but he's not necessarily the God of the Bible. And so that's important to understand. All right. I think we did it. That was David Ben-Gurion. I hope you learned something about him. Amazing, man. I hope you do more studies. I hope you come to Israel with us so that we can land in Ben-Gurion International Airport in Tel Aviv, named after our hero, David Ben-Gurion. And next time you think of David Ben-Gurion, be sure you think of him like this, okay? Bada bing, bada boom. There he is, standing on his head, all right? Hey, great to see everybody. Come back next week for Eliezer Ben Yehuda. Sign up to be a part of our interest meeting. Get on there. We want to see you in our interest meeting, all right? Find out ways you can get connected to the Friends of Israel. Thank you so much for coming. We love you so much, everybody, and we'll see you next week.